Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to learn more about the Accessibility Internet Rally. That's what we're going to talk about today, mostly the nuts and bolts of the competition and how it works and how you can be involved. My name is Sharron Rush. I'm the Executive Director and founder of Knowbility. Knowbility is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're based in Austin, Texas, but we do work all over the world. And probably the beating heart of our organization is this competition that we call AIR, the Accessibility Internet Rally. And I'm going to talk about it today and hopefully answer any questions that you might have about participation, and hope that I'll get you interested enough that you want to participate too. So on the screen right now, you see my email address, my phone number, and if any questions don't get answered today, feel free to contact me and let me know what those are. So the first thing is, the central question here is, what is AIR? And it's our acronym for the Accessibility Internet Rally. And basically, it's a fun and friendly web raising competition. So what we do is challenge teams of web developers to learn about accessible design. And then we recruit nonprofit or cultural organizations that need websites, and these teams can then use their new skills to design websites for those groups. The goal of AIR is really to engage communities in issues of technology access for people with disabilities, and that's a field of practice that's commonly known as accessibility. Many years ago, when I was working for Easter Seals here in Central Texas, and the tech community was moving to Austin and changing our city, but they were really not very involved in the nonprofit community. And so I started talking to other nonprofit leaders, Anna Sisnet at Austin Freenet, Jayne Cravens at the University of Texas, and just asking people, why do you think that these tech folks who are coming to our town aren't really engaged with the nonprofit sector? And they said, oh, they're busy, you know, and also, why aren't they engaged in accessibility? Accessibility for people with disabilities. They're building all these super keen tech innovations, but they leave out the needs of people with disabilities. And so as I'm having more and more of these conversations, someone said, you know, Sharron, if you want the tech sector to pay attention, you should do something competitive. So we came up with this idea, let's learn about accessibility through a competition where tech folks can show off their skills and nonprofit folks can get a better website for their mission-driven work. Accessibility, when we say the word, we're not talking about bandwidth or rural access. We're talking about people with disabilities. And when sites are designed accessibly, then people with disabilities can acquire the same information. They can participate in the same activities. They can not just read the web, but they can produce and manage content and actively participate as producers as well as consumers of information on the web and in other digital technologies. So from now on, and when we start talking about accessibility and accessible design, we're talking about this access for people with disabilities. And it's a concept that's very closely related to the idea of universal design, that when you create with the needs of people with disabilities in mind, you create products and services and websites that support all people in a better way, and that support all different kinds of technologies. It's very closely related to the notion of usability, that you can design to the highest technology specs, but unless you actually see how people with disabilities or how your customers are interacting with your products, you don't really know how well you've succeeded. So again, accessibility improves the experience for all. And the late, great Dr. John Slayton, who was one of those I met when I started on this exploration, He was a blind professor of English at the University of Texas, great self-taught technician, and he used to sign his emails with the signature that good design is accessible design. And I think through the years we've seen that's very, very true. A lot of times people get puzzled by the idea of, what do you mean accessible to people with disabilities? How do blind people use the web? Or how do people with disabilities even interact with technology? And the fact is they often use what we call assistive technology, which is something like a screen reader that takes speech to text, or sometimes adaptive strategies like keyboard shortcuts or just keyboard-based interactions. And so some pretty easy examples to understand of accessible coding techniques would be if you were going to put captions on your videos, or if you have a meaningful image on your website, you provide some description of it within the code. That's something that's called alt text. You need to label buttons or any things that bring interactions. You want to label them and describe them in a way that's meaningful for people who may not see them or may not see them well. You want to avoid using colors that don't have good contrast because that makes things hard to read. And you also want to think about color blindness and the fact that red on green is not going to be very readable for someone with color blindness. And the fact is, I think something like 1 in 8 men has that kind of red-green color blindness, which might explain some things about tie choices. Anyway, never mind. Keyboard access is really a fundamental thing, a fundamental aspect of accessibility, because so many of the assistive technologies don't use a mouse and are mapped to the keyboard. So keyboard access is something that you want to be sure you think about too when you're thinking about assistive technology and accessibility. The thing to keep in mind is that these assistive technologies are made to support the needs of people with disabilities, but they can't work unless the code is made to standards. And so you want to be sure that the coding techniques allow assistive technology to actually access the function, access the information, and work properly. And if you decide that you are going to participate in AIR, which we hope you do, we will teach you a lot more about this and how it works and show you some really highly interactive demos. Excuse me. One thing I didn't say at the beginning that I meant to say is that at any time, if any of you have questions or comments or anything to add, I'm hoping that this is a pretty informal discussion. I just wanted to let people know what this contest is all about and how to participate. So don't stand on ceremony. If you have questions or comments, please do just chime right in with those.
I'm going to chime in for a second. This is Jayne Cravens.
Hey, Jayne.
Hello. And I've been involved with AIR and Knowbility since it was an offline event. And I just wanted to say two things, and that is so many of the things you do to make your website accessible for people with disabilities, make it accessible for everyone. I'm someone that I really don't like to listen to podcasts. I prefer to read. And so if you transcribe your podcast, I get to read it. Or if you caption your video and I'm in a public place, I get to leave the volume down and still watch the video. So I just really emphasize that what you're doing is making your website accessible for everybody. Don't think of it as just one group. It really does benefit absolutely everyone. And the other thing is, one of the things I love about AIR and being involved in it is I'm not a web designer. I am not very smart when it comes to tech. And the way AIR is presented helps me become a digital inclusion advocate. It helps give me language as a non-tech person to be able to talk to my web designers about this. So that's one of the reasons I love this competition so much.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's a good perspective. The slide that we're looking at right now talks about the fact that 1 in 4 adult Americans has a disability. Um, Overall, they say in the population, there's about 20% of people have disability in the general population. But by the time you get to be adults, and especially aging adults, those numbers go up because of the fact that disability is very much age related. People acquire disabilities over time through disease, accident, and the simple fact of aging. So if you think about 1 in 4 adults having a disability, and that the size of that market or constituency or set of stakeholders, that's a pretty huge number. It's 61 million people in the US, and globally now it's almost 1 billion people. So it's getting to be a number that whatever it is that you are doing on the web and whatever message you're putting out there, you definitely want to reach all those people. So for organizations like yours, if you're here today, you're probably representing a nonprofit organization or maybe a project within a school, maybe something like a walking club or a book club or a neighborhood association or an arts group or cultural group. You may be an artist or a musician. Why then should you think about accessibility? Why should it be important to you? So if you're a nonprofit organization, there is no doubt about the fact that people with disabilities are part of your staff. They're among your potential volunteers. They're certainly among your donors. If you think about the age related to disabilities, then you think about how some of those people have very deep pockets, and as they get older, they have acquired their savings through the years and built their fortunes, and they could be among your donors. So you definitely want to include them. And of course, clients. I mean, people with disabilities need the same things that everybody else needs. They need access to information, services, and so you want to be sure that everything that you do in your organization or your project is accessible to everyone. There's also quite a bit of talk these days about diversity and inclusion, and I'm always intrigued by the fact that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we so often overlook the needs of people with disabilities, when in fact, disability is one of the most inclusive conditions. People have disabilities of all ages, of all ethnic backgrounds, of all races. And certainly when you start accommodating the needs of people with disabilities and gaining that perspective, it enriches your vocabulary. And I mean, what Jayne just said about, by learning about this, I'm more able to communicate about this diverse need. Now, if you think about the purpose of the web was meant to break down barriers, to bring people together, to allow them to communicate across geography, across all kinds of what had been barriers in the past. So we definitely want to think about inclusion for people with disabilities in that access. And by creating accessible websites and thinking about that equal opportunity, we, again, make better websites for everyone. Funders often want to know about your non-discrimination policies. How do you demonstrate that you are non-discriminatory? And so being able to say, well, we are so concerned about inclusion and making sure that we don't discriminate, that we have created an accessible website. It's a very powerful statement. And then finally is the big bugbear of your legal obligation. The fact is that the United Nations made a, what do they call it, a declaration? No, Jayne, you know what they call it when they make that statement of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights of people with disabilities. They include the idea of access to technology as a basic human right in the modern world. that there's, so the UN Rights Convention, that's the word, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities explicitly calls out the need for access to technology for people with disabilities, equal access. That means accessible websites and applications. There's many laws. There are many laws in the United States. The courts have interpreted the Americans with Disabilities Act pretty aggressively to say the ADA applies to the web, and there have been lawsuits against retail businesses, government agencies, all kinds of organizations. So the nonprofit world should also pay attention to the fact that the Americans with Disabilities Act is more and more being interpreted to mean that your websites as well as your buildings need to be accessible. So those are just some of the reasons that you can think about accessibility as an important priority when you're thinking about your digital communications. Which brings us to AIR, because AIR can help you get an accessible website. And the way that it works is that we recruit teams of web developers. So people who work in a team for a company, or people who have web skills and want to sign up as individuals, we'll put them together as a team. But the idea here is that we get teams of people who are web professionals or studying to be web professionals. We have some student teams as well, and they sign up and say, okay, we want to compete, and we're ready to go to work. And then people like you, nonprofits, artists, non-commercial projects of many kinds, apply, fill out the application, and apply to receive a website. Then Knowbility provides training specific to the roles that are involved. So the web developers get training on these coding techniques that we've been referring to. And the nonprofits and artists and non-commercial projects get a different kind of training. They learn the basics of accessibility and what it is and why we need the kind of coding. We see some demos. We understand more about how people with disabilities use the web and what common barriers are. But we also learn how to be good clients and how to prepare for this team of web professionals that's going to be dedicated to your project for a very limited time. The time is 6 weeks. And so we've got the teams that have signed up, the nonprofits that have applied, and then we look at, as we've trained people and understood more about what their interests are, where they are in the world, what their experience is, what platforms they work on, what platforms maybe the nonprofit is used to, whether it's WordPress or Drupal or some other content management system. And then we create that match where we say, okay, this team is going to work with this nonprofit or this artist, and match them together in that way. We will have a kickoff event, which is a place where you get to stand up and brag about your mission and the work that you do, and meet your team, and we'll match you up on that day. Following the kickoff, you have 6 weeks of dedicated work, and during that time, you have access to all the online trainings. You can come back and do them again. You have access to Knowbility staff who will be supporting you, and during those 6 weeks, we're going to really focus on getting these websites built and tested and drawn up to your satisfaction. At the end of those 6 weeks, the sites are submitted for judging, and then after the judging period, which is, I think, about a month, then we'll have a community celebration to recognize the effort that everyone has gone into making these sites. And so we'll give prizes for the most accessible websites, but all the participating projects will go home with a fully functional, new, accessible website. So that's kind of the framework of the AIR program and how it's going to work starting later this month. So in a nutshell, AIR assigns a team of web professionals to work on your website. We train them in accessible design. We train you to be an effective client. And then we bring you together and provide you with a team mentor who kind of oversees the process and makes sure that everything goes well and that you get a site that you're happy with. Selected projects are going to get that training that I discussed with client and team project management, mentoring and support by Knowbility staff. You'll have a dedicated team of web professionals for those 6 weeks to make your vision come true. And then you get a website design or maybe a redesign. If you're happy with your basic design and you just want to fix the accessibility aspects of it, that's okay too. Now, at this point, I usually throw in a little bit of a cautionary note because this is a 6 weeks, very constrained amount of time. So you want to make sure, first of all, that you're very well prepared with your vision for what you want and the content that you want in the site. And also that you have a reasonable expectation of what a team can do in 6 weeks of volunteer time. And we will definitely help you with that during the process of getting geared up for the kickoff. We also provide optional hosting for a year. If you want to host on the Knowbility server for 1 year, it's free for that first year, and it's $25 a year after that. And then, of course, if you have a host that you're happy with, many nonprofits have dedicated, donated hosting, then we're happy to help move the site to your new host. There's a website URL here on screen if you want to go get all the details and have access to the sign-up form. It's air-rallies.org. That's air-rallies.org. Any questions so far? Any questions about any of the items I've gone through or any of the things I've said?
A question I get frequently is how expensive is it to maintain these sites? You know, you get this site that's fully accessible. Is it expensive to maintain this once you get it?
Well, most organizations these days already have a website, and so it's no more expensive to maintain an accessible site than your standard website. You're going to learn the techniques of, for example, when you put up a new image, how to add alt text. We do provide the post training to help you do that, whoever is assigned to doing your web work at this time. If you don't have a website, and this is going to be your first website ever, then yes, you will have to think about how to budget for the time you need to maintain afterwards. And that's really just a matter of how complex your site is going to be and what technology you use to build it and to maintain it. How do you usually answer that question, Jane, when you get it?
I say exactly what you do.
Well, that's good.
It's no more expensive to maintain an accessible website than a non-accessible website. And I emphasize that, you know, it really is a matter of mentality more than anything. Once you have the mentality of accessibility, then, you know, I frequently work with web design volunteers. I rarely have a staff in a lot of the things I work with. And it takes me probably 20 minutes to talk to the volunteer and explain accessibility to them and point them to resources before they go, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah.
There's standards I need to follow. I mean, they might not be, you know, highly trained like the volunteers for AIR are highly trained and experienced, but there's so many resources out there that I've never had trouble finding a volunteer web designer that gets accessibility and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I'll meet those standards, no problem.
Yeah, they're pretty clear. So the timeline for this year, we are open for registration until September 16th. So we have almost a couple more weeks, I guess, a couple more weeks for signing up. And indicating that you're interested and applying to be one of the sites that's chosen and assigned to a team. And then from September 9th through the 30th, we have several live trainings scheduled, as well as access to the online. We have a Moodle instance where we have all the trainings posted. There's Accessibility 101, which of course these are meant for developers, but the nonprofit participants are not just allowed to, but encouraged to. If you have tech staff on, if you have a tech person, even if that's a volunteer on your staff or associated to your organization, we encourage that you take as much of this technical training as well, so that when it comes time to maintain, you have a good idea and a good good idea of the concepts and a good mastery of being able to do the maintenance in an accessible way. So, so yeah, the dates are on the screen. September 16th is the registration deadline. The 9th to the 30th, we'll be doing trainings. September 17th and 26th are the live developer trainings, where we'll have a Knowbility technical expert doing a step-by-step through the judging form and really helping the developers understand what they need to do to meet requirements. September 18th is a live training for the nonprofit or arts and cultural groups that participate, to have a live training where we'll go through the client preparation sheet and help you understand how to really prepare your materials in a way that's most effective for your team and will make the best use of the time. In addition to that, that 1 hour training, we are available, we as staff are available during what we call help desk hours that we'll send a schedule out where you can just call with questions. And of course, always 24 hours, you can send email with questions that as you prepare, because we want to support you and help you and make sure that you are able to make the most of this limited amount of time you have with your team. So during September and yeah, the rest of September, we're going to be pretty busy doing all that. And then in October is the kickoff event, which I told you was the match. That's where we're going to announce this team is going to work with this nonprofit, or this team is going to work with this artist, and hopefully we'll make those matches. So far, in 20 years of doing this, we've only had a couple where things just didn't work out, and then we just scurry around and find a new match. But for the most part, we're getting pretty good at this, and we can match teams to nonprofits or art projects that they're very excited about. And it's really, the energy on that kickoff day is just really something. It's really great to see the community coming together around the idea of accessibility, but also the idea of doing all this good for all these arts and cultural and nonprofit organizations. So that's really a lot of fun. You're encouraged to come in person if you're in Austin, but we'll have the live stream open so people can participate from wherever they are. So then we go into our 6 weeks of work, and on November 15th, we're all going to have another live event where people will come together. They're going to turn in their final websites. We'll have the judges there, so if some of the teams have maybe had some problems or have still some unresolved questions, we'll have several hours at this site where people can get questions answered or test things out on the judges, or just show off to each other if they want. And there'll be food and drinks, and we're looking forward to this final countdown submission event. It's the first year that we've done this. AIR used to be a live competition, an 8-hour, nose to the page kind of competition. Then for the last 4 years, we've tried to include remote participation, and it's been really great to be able to broaden the number of people who can participate. But we've missed that energy that we had with the live one. So we thought this year we'll do a final countdown submission event. People who are in Austin can come, and we'll have that live energy. People who aren't in Austin, we're going to live stream the whole thing and also can ask questions or solve any problems. One of my favorite AIR occasions was what we did when we had it live. We'd have a room, everybody would be in these different training rooms, and everybody's working away. And we had the judges in a room of their own where people could come and ask questions of the judges. Any question, anytime, any day. I mean, the judges wouldn't write code for you, but they would help push you to, yes, you're going in the right direction. Yeah, you're thinking right. Or, no, you might want to rethink that. And one year this team came in and they were outraged. They were just outraged. They said, well, I think you're going to have to disqualify this other team over here because guess what they did? They brought a blind person on their team. And so, of course, all the judges just started laughing, and they said, well, that doesn't disqualify them. That means they were really smart. They got somebody who needs to use assistive technology to help them while they were building in the time that they were building. And so that's something that we also suggest to every team. And of course, we'll have some blind people there at the final countdown event, and you could ask your questions of them. And then the final event of AIR is the awards and recognition ceremony that will be held January 16th. So once the sites are submitted in November, we give it to the judges, and at least 2 judges look at every single site and make comments and give that feedback to the teams. So there's more detail about the kickoff event, October 3rd. And of course, one thing I didn't mention was the fact that after the event, we'll send the introductory emails to the team and make sure that everybody has their contact information. And then the final countdown event on November 15th, that will be at Galvanize in downtown Austin. And once that has been, those have been submitted to the judges, and they have a copy of the site on the Knowbility server that they're going to use for the judging. But right at that time, you guys are more than welcome to go ahead and push that site live to wherever it is you're going to host, whether you're going to host with Knowbility or host with another provider. You can, after the submission event, you're welcome to post the site, and you don't have to wait for the judging to be over, because the judges will have a copy that they can use for the accessibility assessment. And then finally, the awards on, and that's a nice event. It's a dinner, usually at a downtown hotel. I'm not sure where it's going to be yet. I think we're still looking for a location for that. But it's also going to be live streamed, and we show off all the sites that were made, and let people see the quality of everything that was created, even though there are only 3 top awards. And of course, all teams and nonprofit or cultural arts representatives are invited. It's part of your registration. That's a free event for the participants. So just in the interest of full disclosure and making sure that we manage our expectations, we've had a couple of nonprofits apply this year that we had to turn away because their sites were just too big for what we were going to be able to provide in 6 weeks. So you want to think about small projects, and if you are a large nonprofit, just think about a sub-project or a group of pages that are small enough to be reasonable. 20 pages should probably be the maximum, but your teams can make templates and site designs and things that will allow you to expand and scale it later on. But for the purposes of this competition, you probably want to think somewhere in the range of 20. We've had larger sites, and it depends on the team, but you want to manage those expectations about what is reasonable to expect a team to be able to do in those 6 weeks. And some things that are not provided are that the sites will be fixed after the competition is over. That's why we really want to help you make the most of those 6 weeks, because the developers, you know, that's their volunteer time. They've said, I'm going to do this competition. I'm going to be done. They turn it in and they expect themselves to be done. Now, some teams and their clients, their nonprofit clients, are they forge these really great bonds and they get some kind of volunteer arrangement made afterwards. So that it's not inconceivable that that could happen, but it's not part of what we promise you when you sign up. Ongoing content updates are also something that you will be expected to be responsible for. So you want to make sure that while we're going through this whole process, you have a web designer or developer or just a tech person or a content specialist on your staff or in your group of volunteers who goes through the training and is part of the team and understands how the site is built so that they can do those content updates going forward. Again, the team involvement after the competition is something that could happen if, you know, if you guys hit it off, but it's not likely, and it's usually does not happen. And then site management. So if you decide you want to move to a new host, or you want to somehow change the platform or do any of those sort of technical management ideas, then you really need to manage that on your own. So that's my overview of the AIR program. I think I wanted to give people a chance to ask questions and to see if there was anything that isn't clear. I know there's been some transition in the last few years where it's no longer the on-site 8-hour marathon that it had been, but it's a marathon of a different kind. You've got volunteers working for 6 weeks, and so there have been some questions that have come in through email and phone calls, and so we wanted to try to do this live and see if there were any other questions. So, any questions? Well, all right. If you do come up with any questions, again, my email and phone number is back there at the beginning of the slideshow. I should have put it here at the end, but I didn't. So you can scroll back and find it on the recording. And thanks again for coming. I hope that you'll consider joining the Accessibility Internet Rally. We've had great outcomes in years past. I think some of the nonprofits we've designed for, Safe Place here in Austin, the Austin Tenants Council, Keep Austin Beautiful, lots of artists and sculptors and musicians, a couple of bands last time around. So we'd love to work with you, and I hope you'll consider it. Thank you.